The key takeaway is that you can't just go and earn more brand mentions to be cited and recommended by AI-powered search. They have to be contextually relevant. If you want to be visible in AI search, you have to place a focus on being cited and referenced by third-party publications, typically press publications, news publications, in the context of who you are and what you do. If you don't, you run the risk of confusing the AI platforms about who you are and what you do. Whereas Google may ignore irrelevant links, you can end up distorting the understanding of the AI platforms about who you are, what you do. If they don't understand who you are, they don't understand what you do, you run the risk of not being surfaced at all. I'm James Brockbank, and this is SEO in 2026.
James, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one SEO tip for 2026 is that you need to be earning press mentions if you want your brand to be recommended by AI-powered search.
So why press mentions over other mentions, other content online?
100%. Press mentions in the grounds that when we talk about AI search, and when I talk about AI search, I'm talking about Google's AI overviews, Google AI mode, but also the AI chatbots such as ChatGPT, those sort of platforms. They pull their sources disproportionately from trusted and authoritative sources, third-party mentions on the web. And just so happens that a large percentage of those are what we would class as press publications. It's all rooted in the grounds that you can't be recommended as the best if you're the only person who's saying it. So when the AI-powered platforms are making summaries, making recommendations, they're pulling from a multitude of sources, almost as that validation that you should be recommended. One of the most effective ways to do that is to get mentioned in the right way in press publications.
So third-party mentions on the web, obviously there will be publications with differing degrees of authority, perceived authority. How do you know which publications are the right ones, the best ones to try and get your brand mentioned in?
Okay, so there's a few ways to think about this. The first is that whether we're looking at AI overviews, AI mode, ChatGPT, they reference the sources that they're pulling from. Well, they reference a number of the sources that they're pulling from. So we can run a search, we can put a prompt through these chat platforms, and we can see the types of sources that they are using, which gives us an indication as to the sort of types of features to begin with. So as an example, if you are a D2C brand selling products, you ultimately want to be getting your products and brand featured in product roundups. So the best X, the best X for Y, top 10 products for XYZ. They are, again, disproportionately leveraged by the AI search platforms to make recommendations on products. But we know this by analyzing the sources. The sources are there for us to understand at least the types of content and the types of sources that are being referenced. And we can then build that into a strategy that really clearly lays out, as a brand, we need to be featured in this type of content on these types of publications. Unlike perhaps Google search, where we've spent so many years not necessarily guessing, but reverse engineering and making an educated guess at what the ranking factors are, what we should be doing, what we should be prioritizing. The AI search platforms give us this sort of fresh look at where they're pulling their sources from and where they're summarizing from. It's almost giving us a blueprint to say, here's where we need to be featured.
So in terms of what we need to do we need to search AI for our competitors and then see what publications are being used for our competitors?
Yeah, 100%. So I think we've got I talk about it as three main sort of AI surfaces we need to be paying attention to right now. There's AI overviews, there's AI mode, and there's ChatGPT. You can expand this to Claude, to Perplexity, to Grok. You can keep going. The number of sort of AI-powered platforms is growing rapidly. But I think the majority of traffic and sort of activities, it's centered across the two Google AI surfaces and ChatGPT for the most part right now. So asking, running prompts, asking questions. So an example I give all the time is looking for a recommendation on the best bean to cup coffee machine. So we can ask this, make a recommendation of the best bean to cup coffee machine under £500, under £1,000 with milk frother. We can start to play around with the prompts and the questions that we ask in those three main surfaces: AI overviews, AI mode, ChatGPT. And then we can see the sources. What I would recommend is make sure you are, if it's Google, you are running this not logged into an account that you are heavily using. It will bias towards personalization. And ChatGPT especially, make sure you're running a search with memory turned off. Again, there's just a little button on the top right of your screen on ChatGPT to allow you to do that. The best way I can describe that is it's like incognito mode in Chrome, to make sure that you are getting almost that vanilla response there, as opposed to one that, ChatGPT, as an example, I can go and ask it the best digital PR agency, the best SEO agency, and it will tell me that Digital is that every single time because it knows who I am, what I do, and I have almost trained it in the memory. You go and run that on anybody else's account, and that is not the result that comes up top. So I think, again, understanding that these platforms have a bias, ChatGPT especially has a bias to memory. So removing that to get a true understanding of what sources are being pulled from and what does that AI know.
You mentioned ChatGPT and Google there as maybe two primary places to check initially. If it comes to pass that over the next year or so there are other AI search engines that become more popular, do you think that optimizing for ChatGPT and Google will also mean optimizing for other AI engines in the future?
To a certain extent, yes. And I think, it's probably a good point for me to add my opinion in here, that I believe that Google will hands down win the AI search battle, as it were. I think right now that is clearly being, the two players in that are OpenAI and Google. To me, there is no question that Google will come out the winner here. Google has the infrastructure, it has the audience. I was at the cinema over the summer with my children, and Google were advertising before a film in terms of the advert was essentially, you can now search in new ways thanks to AI mode and AI overviews. Google are running primetime TV ads to educate an audience who is very familiar with who they are and what they do in the new ways to search. But Google has their web index, they have their knowledge graph, and they have now layered in Gemini, their LLM, on top of that. I fail to see a scenario where Google doesn't come out the winners in the end. On the way, we've got ChatGPT, we have Perplexity, we have Claude, which I think are certainly in the circles that I'm in online. I think Claude is very much, and Anthropic is favored by coders, by programmers who are using to code. So I think, we will see LLMs in a broader sense become tailored to specialist use cases, I believe. But I think ultimately when it comes to AI search, Google, I don't see a world where Google doesn't win.
Okay. So how do we go about earning these types of mentions once we've actually determined where we would like to be mentioned?
100%. And this is where it gets really interesting. But there are 3 core tactics that I can recommend to do this. They are all in a wrapper of PR. And I think, interestingly, the way I've started talking about what many are now calling GEO, generative engine optimization, is that really it's great SEO plus great PR. I think, there has been a lot of sort of discussion about, is GEO just SEO? No, I don't think it is. It's not just PR either. Ultimately, it's taking what you say about yourself, what other people say about you, and looking at what comes in that corpus of information that is found from these multiple sources. But I think ultimately, GEO is great SEO plus great PR. So when we look at the PR side of it, we have 3 core tactics depending on brand, which are very, very influential to AI-powered search visibility. The first of those is product PR. Now, I talk about product PR in a sense of that can be product PR, that can be service PR, ultimately your product being what you offer. Getting that featured in press coverage, ultimately about who you are and what you do. And I think that is that holy grail for AI search visibility. it is being featured in the right context. And brand mentions, links are a difficult one because links still power traditional search visibility, and there is no questions about it that both the Google surfaces and OpenAI use web search results as one of the foundations of when they're running RAG, when they're retrieving sources for grounding. Traditional search still matters for being visible in AI search, but it's the brand mention, it's being mentioned across the web in the right context of who you are and what you do, predominantly in third-party publications, third-party mentions, which is absolutely key. So in terms of product PR, getting your brand featured in listicles of top 10 best roundups, absolutely essential for e-commerce brands, for retailers, D2C brands. But also this extends to, we look at whether it's best insurance providers, we can expand this to best CRM software. Looking at it in that sense, the almost I don't want to call it a shortcut because it's not when done in the right way, but you need to be featured in roundups that recommend you as the best. Ultimately, that is product PR. The next one is proprietary data studies. Now, if I was asked what's the highest ROI activity any brand could be doing right now to be visible in AI search visibility, it's investing in proprietary data studies, data research. Why? Why is that so impactful? And I'm talking about things like industry reports, expanding white papers to give you essentially a variety of data studies to tell stories from. This is so important because this is something that AI cannot do itself. If we think we are now working in a world where anybody can go and create content about anything, whether they know anything about that or not, in seconds with ChatGPT. So actually, we have to look at it and go, well, if we want to be surfaced by these platforms, surfaced in AI overviews, in AI mode, and ChatGPT, what can we bring to the table that isn't already in the corpus of information that exists either in the training models or elsewhere on the web? Proprietary data is one of the fastest and most effective ways to do that because you are bringing in something that AI does not have and AI cannot do itself. And then we get on to the third one, which is expert insights, commentary, thought leadership, both reactively and proactively, being cited as an expert, as an individual, but that's connected to a brand entity. It's reputation building. It's being seen as a cited expert on that topic. And again, this brand association of who you are and what you do. So issuing comments to the press proactively, reactively. Ultimately, right now, journalists want this too, because journalists and publications are facing the same battles that many of us are with informational content, that if the AI can create it itself, the AI will do. What is the one thing that journalists and publications can do to add value? It's bring in expertise from genuine experts to add value. So it's a win-win for both the publishers and the brands and the spokespeople in that sense.
Love it. Okay, and very, very specific in terms of advice you've offered there as well. So how do you go about earning these types of mentions? Number 1, product PR, listicles and roundups. Number 2, proprietary data studies. Number 3, expert insights and thought leadership. You also said that GEO was great SEO plus great PR. Which elements of great SEO need to be maintained for AI SEO?
I mean, I think ultimately, and I follow quite closely what lots of people are saying on this topic right now. And I think ultimately, if you have been doing SEO in I'm going to call it the right way, but I'm very, very aware that's also open to opinion, in terms of an approach of relevance and an approach of not just creating content for the sake of it, but almost adhering to what Google termed EEAT, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. They are the foundations of it. But I think ultimately, we have different challenges with GEO, which is why the things that come to mind are JavaScript, as an example. The LLM bots are pretty poor / incapable of rendering JavaScript. Google is the exception there. So you need to ensure that your content is actually accessible. Now, We know that Google is able to render JavaScript. ChatGPT cannot render JavaScript. So if your pages are client-side rendered with JavaScript, then ChatGPT, as an example, or the OpenAI bot will see your content as a blank page. So it cannot be understood and surfaced. The other one is how content is structured. Again, many of us have called it semantic SEO for a number of years now, making sure that content is structured so it's easy to understand. You're using headings correctly. You're grouping core themes together rather than just writing fluff. But this is, certainly to me, it's great SEO. But I think why this matters is because the AI-powered search platforms pull from and ground their answers in search results, whether that's Google, whether that's Bing. So actually maintaining a strong visibility on traditional search is absolutely paramount to being surfaced. But because of the way the AI platforms summarize multiple responses, then it can't just be what you say about yourself. It has to include what other people say about you as well, which is where being mentioned across the web, ultimately PR, becomes absolutely essential to being visible in AI search.
James, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
The key takeaway is that you can't just go and earn more brand mentions to be cited and recommended by AI-powered search. They have to be contextually relevant. If you want to be visible in AI search, you have to place a focus on being cited and referenced by third-party publications, typically press publications, news publications, in the context of who you are and what you do. If you don't, you run the risk of confusing the AI platforms about who you are and what you do. Whereas Google may ignore irrelevant links, you can end up distorting the understanding of the AI platforms about who you are, what you do. If they don't understand who you are, they don't understand what you do, you run the risk of not being surfaced at all.
James Brockbank is Managing Director and Founder at Digital Loft. Find out more over at digitalloft.co.uk. James, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thanks for having me, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.